Good morning, I'm Robin Bedingfield, and I'm the coordinator for the Orange County Master Gardeners of the Dig Deeper program. And we are thrilled to have Francis doing our native trees and shrubs this morning. This is an area that many of us need to know more about. And so Francis is going to talk to us about the trees and shrubs that have done well in her yard, which is fabulous. If you have, are you on the tour this year?
No, but I think they're planning a tour for the Master
A
Gardeners.
tour for the Master Gardeners. So the Master Gardeners will be invited, but Francis's garden has been on the Hillsborough Garden Tour before, and I must say her gardens are amazing. So on your way out, please stop by the Community Seed Libraries table in the back. Rebecca will be handing out seeds which are appropriate for planting now. We also have, and we have the schedules of the upcoming May Dig Deepers, and there are 2 opportunities for you to see Kathy Williams do ecological gardening here at Seymour and also at the Hillsborough Public Library. I think that's it. Francis, will you take it over? Thank you.
So I kind of move around a little bit, but I think for recording purposes, I'll have to be a little bit stationary. So today you're going to hear about the trees and shrubs. From a design point of view, I consider them structure and the backbone of the garden, and with a lot of seasons of interest. And I think they're less maintenance, so depending on what you plant, I suppose. And this program will give you some examples. And like Robin said, all of the trees and shrubs in this presentation are in my garden. And I'll show you an overview so you can get the perspective, and then why I've planted what I've planted. Or I should say, my husband and I. He used to be in the Master Gardener program, and I said, oh, that's great, we'll do something together. And then I realized it might have been a mistake because I had all these ideas, and he'd go, well, from what I remember from the class, I don't think this will, work. And so we had some discussions. But he has moved on to more historic things. Okay. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So, we're really lucky to be in this area of the Piedmont for plants, for trees and shrubs specifically, because we have such a rich composite of plants that we can put in. And it has to do with the Appalachian Mountains running north and south. I'm not a geologist, but it allowed the plantings to move to warmer or cooler areas as they needed. And so we've got a variety to choose from. And if you plant natives, of course, many of you know this, you don't need as much pesticide or herbicides because they're natural to our area. They've adapted. Less water, less pruning, weeding. It saves us a lot of time and money. All right, I'm putting a caveat here. I'm not going to tell you that anything is deer proof, because we know that that's become an issue, just the lack of space for the deer, and that they like native plants. That's what they grew up with. So, you have to take that with a little grain of salt. I am not a purist. I have non-native plants in my garden, trees and shrubs, because, an Edgeworthia in the winter, when you look out your window and it's blooming, that adds some beauty and interest to your yard. So not everything in my garden is native, but I try to do a 80, 20, 70, 30, kind of, it goes back and forth depending on what's living at the time. So I just want to put that in there too. But if I have a choice, I will choose a native tree or shrub if it works in my garden. Okay, so we're going to go to the next slide. This is from the roof of my house. My husband took this for another presentation we did. So we're on less than 1/3 of an acre in the town of Hillsborough. And you can see, and when we started, it was one green lawn with 3 huge trees, a maple, a willow oak, and another maple on the other side. Since then, we have lost this maple on the left, so we've had to adjust a little bit. But that I've always loved the woodland garden, and I really wanted to create that in this space. To me, it's a calming environment. When you walk in from the driveway, it's like 10 degrees cooler than anywhere else because of all the trees and shrubs we have now. We are having problems keeping the grass green because it's getting a lot more shade. So we're trying to figure out what we're going to do with the walkway, the pathway as we move forward. Because my husband is a grass man, but he's seen the light, I think. And this is another time with that. The first one was in the morning. This is more in the afternoon. Every part of a yard gets at least 2 to 4 hours of sun, and it moves around. So all of the plants I will tell you about today they'll do full sun to part shade, and even some deep shade in some cases. And I'll show you examples of that. Needless to say, I can't tell you about every single tree and shrub in the garden, but some of my favorites. And then this is a couple of weeks ago from the ground level in early April. And you can see I have Laura petalum with the green, and the dogwoods were blooming, and that red with the white I thought was really beautiful. So we keep the Laura petalum. And this is again in April 25, more from the top window of our house. So, and I will say, some of these pictures were taken. We have since put in a fence because I did get frustrated, and I hope the deer appreciate how much money we spend on them. But I am seeing things bloom and pop up that I have not seen in the 10 years that we've lived here. And when we first moved in, there'd be 1 or 2 deer in the yard, and I could handle that. But now, like, we have a herd of 11 in the neighborhood, and they find me. But now they can't come in, and they go to my neighbor's yard, so they're not too happy, my neighbors. But, what can you do? All right, so we're going to start. So one of the ones that I first found out about was the Aesculus parviflora, the bottlebrush buckeye. All of the pictures in here are either from my garden, my own camera, which I'm not the greatest photographer, but I think you can get the effect, or I've gone to the North Carolina Plant Toolbox and downloaded the pictures from that. Oh, and also that's one of my resources, as well as these 2 books. This book, Native Plants of the Southeast by Mellenchamp. He lives in Charlotte, or did. Anyway, so great book. And then Essential Trees and Shrubs for the Eastern United States. Again, I like to go through them now and check off the plants that I have now in my garden and see what I have to still get, right? But so this, and all of the plants in here, I'm not going to talk about part sunlight, shade, all that. They're almost always the same. All right. They're all going to take part sun to light shade. They'll all take moist to dry soils. Most of them say start them if they require moist soil. You kind of keep them moist through the first year. Then they acclimate to your garden situation. And most of them, the plants, the trees and shrubs I've planted have made it through our droughts. Okay. And also take the height and width with a grain of salt. Sometimes they get a little bit bigger than it says, but most all of them are prunable too. It's not a major problem. But I love this plant, the leaves coming out in the spring. This is late spring. The bottlebrush flower bloom comes up. It's very dramatic. And then the fall color is really nice. And I do try to get 3-season interest as much as possible so that you can enjoy the plant more than just one season. And this is fairly deer proof. It's on the side of a yard outside of the fence. I've never had the deer bother this. They might try to nibble, but especially the fawns, and then they go away. It also attracts the eastern swallowtail butterfly. Now, I'm not an insect person. I've added some insects in here, but don't ask me any details about them. And I consider this a great hedge plant. It is deciduous, but if you plant it with other evergreen type of plants, it's a great way to create a hedge between, a barrier between your yard and something else. And this, another one that people always ask me what my favorite plant is. It does depend on the time of the year. Right now, this is my favorite. The Aesculus pavia, the red buckeye. And this is one of the first trees I planted in our garden because the red blooms draws the hummingbirds. And I read that the male hummingbird will come first, try to find the nectar, and if they're doing a good job, the females will follow them, and then, they get together. But these are, and you can see how the buckeye comes out with that really interesting blossom, I guess, or bud, terminal bud. I've interplanted it on the right with Virginia bluebells because it starts blooming the same time as the buckeye, and I love that red and blue combination. And as the bluebells expand around it, I think it'll become even more dramatic. So, from a design perspective, which is to me always a kind of an important part in my garden anyway. The fruit of the red buckeye doesn't really have a lot of value. People collect them, they put them in their pocket, rub them for good luck, or use them for decorations in the winter, Christmas decorations and things like that. But it's just, I think, a fascinating plant. And the leaves droop. I used to think that it needed more water, but that's just the way it hangs. So it's not something to worry about. Okay, and the pawpaw, it's one of the few trees that have the native fruit in North Carolina. When I first planted it, I planted it because I liked the shape of the tree and the leaves. I really didn't care about the fruit that much. And because it does draw wildlife, like, we had a couple of raccoons in the neighborhood. I didn't really want them coming into my yard, but I ended up getting fruit anyway because 2 streets over, a neighbor had 2 huge pawpaws and it cross-pollinated. So you do need ideally two different varieties to get the fruit if that's what you want. So I've had like 3 or 4 pawpaw to eat, and I like them. My husband's not too crazy about them. So, and again, nice fall color. It draws the zebra swallowtail larvae. It's a host plant for that. And you can see the shade it provides. It grows pretty quickly. The tree we have is only about 5 years old, and it's creating this nice shade for us. And if you see the blossoms, that means you'll get a pawpaw on it, the fruit. And this is the sweet shrub. I think probably anyone from the South will know the sweet shrub, the calicantha. And you can see it has the red blossoms. And again, decent fall color. It's not the greatest, but it's one of those iconic Southern shrubs. And the deer don't bother it. I've had deer, what is it when their antlers come in? They rub on it. But it's so, you get new stems every year, so it wasn't problematic about that. It kind of has a slow to medium growth and it lives a long time. And you can transplant this thing with no problems. This shrub was pretty big. It had a giant root ball, and I decided I needed to move it 3 feet forward because I can put another plant in the back. And my husband had just had heart surgery, and so he couldn't do it, which was his job. So I said, I'm going to do it. I'm not waiting because that's got to be done now. And he goes, really? You could wait like a year. I said, no, got to do it now. So he's sitting on that bench and I'm digging around it, pulling the dirt away, digging around it. And he's telling me he said, I'm not doing it right, telling me how to do it. So what would take him maybe 1 to 2 hours took me 5, but I did it. And it's beautiful. It came right back because I thought for sure it was going to die, but it's a hardy shrub. You can do pretty much anything with it. An interesting fact about this, they say if you want to get one with an aroma, you should buy it while it's in bloom so you can test it. Not all of them smell or have a great aroma. And also that really the bloom you'll only get the scent once. It says it's produced on the first time it flowers, usually in the evening when it opens up, because it's pollinated by a moth. And then the flower will close and it'll open up the next day, but you'll never get the scent again on it. Now, I haven't tested that, but it was in one of the books, so we'll go with that. So it's kind of interesting. But again, I like the color of the bloom, and it blooms in a time of the year when, I guess it's late spring, yeah, or early summer. Okay, the button bush. Not many people think of putting a button bush in their garden. The standard is a humongous shrub. It can grow 15 feet high and wide, and it's got this nice rounded shape. So if you have the space for it, you don't really have to prune it. But you can prune it back and it'll do well. It's deciduous, but those tiny little flowers right there, they remind me of the Sputnik. So kids love that, the spaceship. And they have a nice aroma, which of course attracts tons of pollinators all over the shrub. It blooms best in full sun. Again, a caveat, these plants will bloom in part shade, but it'll be more profuse if you have a bloom on that plant in the sun, in the full sun. But then you have to water more too, right? It does like moist space, but mine is not really in a wet area, and it's adapted and it's doing well. There is one at the pollinator garden, two at the pollinator garden at Gold Park. So early summer, you'll see it bloom if you're in that area. It's rarely bothered by deer. And is really good for wet areas and erosion control too. So if you have problems with a lot of erosion, this is a good shrub. There is a new variety, a new cultivar called Sugar Shack, which I have in my garden because I did have a standard and I had to take it out. It just overwhelmed the space. So it's Sugar Shack, and it only gets to about 4 feet high and wide. So that's more practical for a regular home garden. Of course, the red bud, beautiful color. That's one of those trees you see on the highway blooming the first time as you zip down the road. Now there are so many varieties of the red bud, and we're lucky because North Carolina State has developed quite a few of those. The one in my yard in the middle is called Burgundy Hearts. So you see, instead of the bright green leaves, it has more of a burgundy tone, which I wanted because we had the sculpture, and you can see the design, what I wanted with the design purpose, kind of that color echoing. And then in the fall, late summer, the sun shining through the leaves on the right-hand side kind of had that reddish tone flickering in the light. And they're known, with the heart-shaped leaves. So it's kind of a really nice, iconic southern tree to have in your yard, early budding in the spring. And it's the host plant for the Henry's elfin butterfly, which I read somewhere was a bit, you don't see that as much because a lot of the host plants are disappearing. I can't say that I've actually seen it in my yard. I have a picture of it later on in one of the other slides. And again, this tree will do well in full shade. But it blooms when a lot of the deciduous trees don't have their leaves on it. So it does get the sun enough to bloom in the spring, early spring. Probably everyone has a red bud in their yard, I would think. Should maybe. The fringe tree. It's blooming right now. You'll see that. And this is the one in our garden. And you walk by and this aroma just kind of hits you. And you think, where's that? Where's that coming from? And it's just so beautiful with the white blooms on it. They look really feathery, kind of this ethereal kind of feel as you walk by it. And it has, kind of a fall color, that yellow. Didn't really plant it for that, but it provides some color. One of the things you need to know is that the male has a greater bloom capacity than the female. If you want, and the female does have berries and flowers on it, but you do need the male. But you don't know if you have a male or female till you plant them because they can't tell you before you see it come out. So if you want to make sure, you're going to have to buy several to test it out. But if you just even the female will bloom not quite as prolific as this one. So I think I have the male. But so it's one of those things you learn after you plant the plant. I've done that a lot. I planted something and then realized, like the pawpaw, if you want fruit, you need to have two, right? If you want to have berries on your female fringe tree, you need to have the male, that kind of thing. It is a host to the sphinx moth larvae. And again, the Henry's elfin butterfly. The Native Americans used it as a disinfectant and a dermatology aid. I have read it can be attacked by the emerald ash borer. So I imagine if you're planted it and you have a grove of emerald ash trees in your yard, it may attack your fringe tree. We only have this one. I'm hoping, being solitary, that, the ash borer will find it. But it's worth it if it makes it. Then the red twig dogwood. I planted the red twig dogwood and the yellow twig dogwood mostly for winter color. And I've planted it against an evergreen, or back here you can see. So when you see it out from the window, you see that bright red against the green or the dark green. So, kind of think of again, the design value of it. It does bloom like a dogwood, not as prolific. And you do see the pollinators on it, and they're blooming right now in the spring. And usually what I do is I prune out any of the branches that are over 1 inch, because the color is more vibrant on the new branches coming up. It does sucker a little, but it's easy to pull out where you don't want it to sucker to. And it doesn't sucker really, it's not aggressive, assertive. It's assertive, not aggressive. But, again, it's just great winter, a great winter color. And the birds and the wildlife really flock to it. Oh, this is also great for rain gardens and erosion control. It does like a damp soil, but again, once it's established, mine has done well in the drier area. This is one of, I have to say, showstopper. We planted this to replace a viburnum that had died in our front yard. And every time we're out in the front yard, people stop, go, what's that? What's that tree? So this is a smoke tree. It's kind of underused. There are several varieties. There's now a shorter version if you don't want the full tree form. But this is the bloom in early summer. It has a high tolerance for heat, drought, poor, dry soils. I mean, it pretty much takes anything. The deer don't bother it. This is outside of our fence. And it had that smoky bloom, which is why they call it the smoke tree. You can prune it pretty heavily. And as you can see, I don't know if you can tell it as easily, but there are some bare gaps between the blooms on those branches. And when that happened to our tree, I thought, oh my gosh, what's killing this thing? Why are these disappearing? And I was at Ralston Arboretum and saw the tree, or was it Plants Delight? And I saw theirs, and theirs was doing the same thing. So I asked the guide, I said, what's wrong with this tree? He goes, no, that's how it grows. So you'll see these bare spots. So if you prune it, it'll grow, the blooms come up on the new stem. So you might not have those bare spots if you prune it harder, but we just leave it because I think it's an interesting kind of modern art form. And it's on the corner and it doesn't really, but again, like I said, it's a conversation piece. The fall color in the middle, you can see is pretty, it's a nice fall color too. So it has kind of a 3 interest. And the most important thing, resistant to deer. The Alabama croton. I found out about the shrub last year. I was reading a book, maybe it was in one of those, and they talked about what a wonderful shrub this is. And I couldn't find it anywhere in the area, so I did have to mail order it from a native nursery in South Carolina. And I asked the woman, I said, why isn't this out here in the nursery trade? She didn't know. She did have she had one landscaper that was their signature plant, and they put it into every garden they planted down in South Carolina. But it can be semi-evergreen if the winter isn't too hard on it. It's uncommon, so you won't see it in everybody's garden. It has these, in the early spring, you'll get that yellow flower in the middle. And then at the leaves, when the wind blows, it kind of has this silvery tone on the backside, and you can see that silver going back and forth, which is kind of cool. And then the fall color, oh my gosh, it's really bright orange. That was the first year, so it's not as dramatic as some of the pictures in the books, but you can see the potential. And again, this is one the deer don't like. And it's the male and female portions of the plant are on the same plant. So that's why you can get the flowers. You don't need a separate male, female. And this is another one. It does sucker a bit, the swamp tie. That's not how my husband says it, but anyway. It does grow fairly large. I think there's a smaller cultivar out there. I briefly read, but I couldn't find it again when I went back to look. It is shallow rooted, kind of like an azalea. It's great for rain gardens. It likes the moist soil. I have one in my rain garden, one outside, and they're, more in the regular soil, and they're both doing well. It blooms in the early summer. And it says it attracts the most interesting insects, but I couldn't see what the list of insects were. They didn't describe that. It can grow into a small tree, but it's easily pruned to a shrub size if you don't want it to be a tree size. Again, it's not widely used in a home garden, maybe because of the suckering or maybe because of the size, but I'm trying it because the pollinators love it for sure. And the color in the fall, is just so attractive. This one can be browsed by deer. Maybe that's why it's not as widely used in the home garden. Oh, and you can see the interesting flower form on this too. It's a little different than your normal shrub. The Fothergilla, I've read several authors and they all say Fothergilla is one of those shrubs everyone should have in their yard. It's got a great 3-season interest. It's, the blooms in the spring. It's just starting to stop blooming now. It's multi-seasonal interest. Beautiful fall color, that dark, rich, red, orangey color. It's in the witch hazel family. And it also does well in a rain garden if you need it for that. There is the dwarf Fothergilla. So the standard gets 6 to 10 feet high, but they're very prunable too. But there is a dwarf one that is not as tall. And I had planted the cultivar Blue Airy with a it's supposed to have more blue toned leaves, but mine reverted back to green. So I'm not sure why. Again, great pollinator attractor because it's one of those things blooming in the early spring. And it is resistant to deer. Before we had the fence, the deer really didn't bother this, but maybe I had other stuff they changed. So this is a good shrub. And the common witch hazel. And this is a noctuid moth. That's what it's pollinated by. I always like the witch hazel because I like the astringent. So I thought it would be cool to have the plant in my yard. I don't make my own, but it's kind of neat. I guess I could if I wanted to go through all that. The flowers appear in the very early spring. So it's one of those plants that help the pollinators when nothing else is coming out or not much else. And usually in, the cold months, October through December, and you can see what the flowers look like. And I have it between a neighbor's yard and ours, and the deer have not bothered that either. So that's a good one outside of the fence. Supports a lot of butterfly and moth larvae, and the fall color is good too. So kind of a 3-seasonal interest. And I like the shape of it. It's sort of that vase shape. And I pruned the bottom off so it does keep that more instead of having all the suckers come up.
Can you describe how tall that is?
That one, let's see, is about 8 feet tall right now. Yeah, but I don't care how tall it gets, but where that is, because I am creating that barrier between my neighbor's yard and ours, just to give us a little privacy. Because they built the house after we moved in, and I tried to plan in advance, so added that. And of course, the oak leaf hydrangea. I used to think the deer did not like this, but unfortunately they have learned, right? I like the bold texture of the oak leaf hydrangea and of course the fall color, then the spring blooms. The one down on the bottom in the middle is outside of the fence near our porch, but it's on the driveway and it's not really been bothered by deer because there's a lot of movement and traffic. So that has worked for that. And then the one on the far right is well, you can see they can get pretty high, 8 by 8. Ruby slipper is only supposed to get like 3 to 4 by 3 to 4 feet tall wide. So I got that for the backyard. And so far, it's still that size. So so there's something for a smaller garden too. I like the bark in the winter when it's that exfoliating bark. I think that's interesting too from a design perspective. It does flower on the old wood, so if you're going to prune it right after it flowers so that it has time to set the buds. And again, pollen magnet for the native bees. And it does say usually that it prefers moist soil, but you can see where it is on the driveway. That's not moist soil, and it's established and it's doing well. It does withstand drought once it's established. The winter berry, again, I planted it for winter interest. If the berries stay on before the birds eat them all. It is a deciduous holly. And I have two varieties. One produces the red berry. This is called Red Sprite. And this is the one in the middle is called Winter Gold. They each need their own gentleman to pollinate. The Red Sprite, you have to plant it with a Jim Dandy. And the Winter Gold, you have to plant it with a Southern Gentleman. You need the male plant for the berries. And it's the timing of the pollination, which is why you need that specific male plant. So Red Sprite would not work with some Southern Gentleman. Okay. And it's really a very interesting plant. And if all the leaves fall off and you still have berries, like I said, if the birds haven't eaten it, then it looks really good. And the Red Sprite is it's a shorter cultivar. That is only about 4 feet high. The Winter Gold, it's in the back of the yard. Like I said, I'm creating a screen where our neighbor's porch is. And that one gets to right now it's about 6 feet tall, but I expect it'll get a little taller. It says over 48 species of birds, including the cedar waxwing, enjoy the fruit, and the pollen supports tons of bees and insects. And you only need one male. If you want several females, you only need one male for a bunch. They work hard.
About deer?
No, the deer did not bother this plant before the fence either. Yeah. Okay. Truly one of my favorite, which I use a lot. I'm going to start on the right-hand side, the Florida anise, the Lycium floridanum. Great evergreen plant. Deer don't like it. I use it as a barrier. It's a hedge shrub for us. We have several. You can see the red flowers. They're now blooming in the garden. Some people don't like the aroma. It bothers them. Some it doesn't bother. But, if it's far enough, if it does bother you, plant it far enough away. Deer don't like it. It's evergreen. I call it my rhododendron wannabe because I don't have luck with rhododendrons, the big flowered mountain rhododendrons. So this is blooming about the same time as the rhododendrons would. And it is a tall shrub, but it does take pruning quite heavily. You can prune it quite heavily. But it does make a nice screen. Oh, shade. It'll bloom in shade. So if you have a shade garden, this is a great plant. It does tend to like moist soil, but again, once it's established, it will do great in a drought. We've not had any problems losing any. Sometimes you'll see the leaves really droopy, in a hard drought, and I may water them, but generally speaking, it does really great. And then the one on the left is the yellow anise. Same plant, but this one doesn't really have any flowers to speak of. They do, but you can't hardly see them. But this is a great plant in shade if you want to brighten up a shade corner. Or against a dark shrub or something that, that contrast is really cool. I will say the red, although it blooms now, it does bloom sporadically all year long. Itea virginica, the sweet spire. There are several varieties of that. Most people know the Henry Garnet because it's a smaller version of it. The one I have is sort of a mid thing. I have Saturnalia. It's starting to bud out right now. Again, great fall color. Of course, that picture doesn't show it, but that's my picture. And in more sun, it gets more blooms, and probably the fall color will be a little brighter. But they're very showy let's see. It does sucker, but they're easy to pull out if it's going places you don't want it to do. Or, dig out the suckers and plant another plant. Donate it to the plant fest. And again, it attracts a wide variety of pollinators in the garden. And I have not had the deer bother mine, although some people say it does. So, and I don't know. Oh, the spice bush, again, this is again on the side yard, outside of the fence, deer proofish. Full sun to full shade, it says, again, it'll bloom. You'll have the little yellow blossoms. It'll bloom better in more sun than not. Oh, actually, the deer don't bother it, but it is not outside the fence. My apologies, different plant. But I love the way it smells, if you scrape the bark. Has very early fragrant flowers. And again, you have the male and the female, and you don't know which you have until you plant it. So if you want to, have a better chance of getting the female, which has the berries, you need the male. So you'll have to plant several if you have the space for it. Otherwise, you just go with what you get. Great fall color. And, it's usually kind of more of a roundish bush. We've pruned it up a little so we can plant things underneath. And if you do have berries, that doesn't last long because the birds go after it. And it's also a good plant for a rain garden. And the deer don't bother this, generally speaking, because they don't like the aroma. And it is a host plant for the spice bush swallowtail. It's a great, if you can find the caterpillar to show that to your grandchildren, and it curls up in its little leaf. And then the sourwood, I had someone say they thought it was a kind of a weedy plant, but that's not been my experience. This sourwood is actually a picture of a friend of mine that she has in her garden, which is why I wanted to plant it in mine, because I love that fall color. Kind of a medium-sized tree. And then you have the flowers in the summer that are, very different. It's an important source for the midsummer pollinators. And it's also a great tree for nesting birds. And of course, we all love sourwood honey, right? So that's where the source of that is. And the 9-bark, it's not the showiest shrub, but I like those dark leaves. I have a variety called Diablo. And just to change up the leaf color on the side of the yard, the deer have not bothered this either. It is a deciduous shrub. And the 9-bark comes from the peeling bark. There are like 9 layers on it. And then I like that winter bark shedding too. I think that's an interesting. It does have this like mounding shape, like this vase mounding shape, which I really like in the garden. And the striking white flowers, which will be coming out pretty soon. And yeah, and it can be pruned fairly hard if you need to cut it down to size a bit. But also prune this right after it flowers, because it does grow on old growth of flowers. Well, I did say I don't have much luck with rhododendrons, but this is the azalea, not the mountain azalea, not the mountain rhododendron, but this is what it's looking like right now in my yard, the thing. And then you can see hemlock in the background, which I'll talk about later. And you can see also on the left, the red flowers of the Elysium behind it. And I have underplanted this with Jacob's ladder, that bright blue, which that idea I stole from the botanical garden. They had that one year and I thought it was so beautiful. So I planted the Jacob's ladder all around, and unfortunately it did not come out in the picture, but it is a tree and shrub presentation and not perennial. So, and the one on the right is a coastal azalea. I also have those in my yard, but they're brand new and they haven't really flowered like that, but that's what it's supposed to look like. And then the Adrena bee is the insect that pollinates it. Oh, the coastal azaleas, well, maybe it's not the one I have, but supposedly evergreen, not to be confused with the Japanese evergreen azalea. And again, if you're going to prune the azaleas, do it right after it blooms because it also blooms on old growth. The ball miner, I think this is an interesting shrub because it's kind of reminds you of being in the tropics, but it's a native palm in our area. It's a great specimen for for cold seasons because it stays green. And then, of course, the shape is so different. You know, you got that spiky shape. So think about design when you plant that. You should plant it in the spring, so it needs a whole summer to really get set. If you plant it in the fall, it may die because the roots haven't set yet. Like I said, a great contrast in leaf form in your garden. The trunk, you don't usually see the trunk because it grows underground. And there are small white flowers that are really insignificant. The author of the book I got it from said that they're not that attractive, although I didn't find them. They're like, any palm flower that spike that comes up. And it's very slow growing. So if you want to have instant impact, buy a bigger plant, which means they're a little bit more expensive probably since they are slow growing if you buy a big plant, but depends on how much time you have. Okay, and I wanted an evergreen in my garden, and most evergreens need full sun. So I found the hemlock, which will take shade to part sun. I've got one in each corner of the backyard. I for whatever reason, this evergreen just attracts me. The branches, they kind of just go like this. I mean, they look like, I don't know, ballerina almost. So I've planted 2 of those and they've done great. Now I know in the mountains where there are tons of hemlocks, they've been, decimated by that aphid-like insect, the agid. So it's a possibility, but again, because I planted just 2 on either side, it's not a grove, I'm hoping it will not be found. But this one is about 5 years old. They did say slow growing, and I think I bought it at 3 feet high. So you can see how much it's grown. But the hemlock caroliniana is narrower and not as big as the Canada hemlock. So, watch what you buy. The Canadian hemlock, which is also kind of native to our area, gets much bigger. But this is a good evergreen to plant. The deer don't attract it, so that could be a good mix if you're doing a shrub border, adding the hemlock. It's not easily found though, that's the problem. I just happened to be at a nursery where they had them and 2 different times actually. They only had one, I got it, and then another nursery just happened to have one and I bought that one. So probably you could mail order them if you wanted to get it. And then our last slide, the viburnum pawpaw. So a lot of the native viburnums, they kind of clump them together because they're very similar. And they're kind of considered one. They're a good 3-season plant. Again, you see the fall color. This is the blossom, and it attracts all of those pollinators. The spring azure butterfly. Have to admit, I've not seen that, but I'm not down there every minute of the day. Excellent for wildlife. The birds love the berries on the viburnum, and you can see the in the background is the Virginiana. Oh my gosh, can I just talk about this plant? But anyway, one of the ones I've talked about, the Saturnalia, the sweet spire. So those 2 are blooming about the same time. Then the hummingbird, clearwing moth, it's also a host plant for that. That's kind of cool. So I had these in alphabetical order. So this is the last slide of the plants and shrubs. I do have others, but we only have so much time. And like I said, these 2 books are great resources to help you out. And the North Carolina Plant Toolbox, because you can put in the filters and it'll give you ideas of what's in their database that may work in your problem. And the final slide, I just took a few weeks ago. See the hemlock, the azaleas, the fringe tree. Oh, this is a Magnolia virginiana on the side, and then the dianthus are planting. So just kind of, all coming together. And here is the resources. These are the 2 books I used, and then, of course, the plant toolbox. And if you have any questions. Yes,
Years ago, I planted what's that tree? The hemlock.
yes.
And it was at a landscaper's suggestion. It was pre-master gardening days. I had trouble with the leader dying out. The
Oh.
landscaper told me just take a stick and tie the closest branch up and it will take over. And it did.
Mhm.
But I don't know if it was the Canadian that I bought or what it was. Have you had any trouble with that?
No, I haven't. And I have had that problem with other trees because we're under the great big willow oak and the maples. You know, when they drop their branches, they have broken leaves on some of my understory tree. And all of these are understory trees, really, because of the size of my garden. That we have done that with other trees, but I haven't had a trouble with those 2 hemlocks at this point. But I'll keep that in mind.
Mine did it from the very beginning and the leader would just kind of die.
Right, yeah.
And I asked the guy about it and he said, oh, just tie it up. It does that.
Okay. Well,
And I'd have to drive by that house. We don't live in it anymore. It's still alive, but I don't know what kind of height it has or what happened with the
Yeah.
leader.
no, I haven't had that. That's not been a problem with us at this point. Mark?
Where are you sourcing your tree?
I kind of roam the nurseries. And I do kick myself now because I did not write down the sources of the plants. I do have a spreadsheet of all the plants in my garden, and the different areas they're in, so I can remember what I planted. But I go to I'm a member of Ralston, so I've gone there giveaway and gotten some of the plants from that. When I read this book, I'll look for them in nurseries. I'll call up. If they don't, I'll mail order it. I don't like to mail order. Like really the only one I've done is the Croton alabamensis. But it's amazing. I mean, I think the nurseries are getting better sourcing the native plants. Yeah, I have to say, I can't say there's one particular one. It's just, I call around if there's a plant I want and see if they can either get it for me or if they have it. No, not off the top of my head. I'll have to look that up. No, it wasn't Wilson Brothers. Yeah. No, it said native plant. I looked up native plant nurseries that had the Alabama Croton, and that's the only one that popped up. So that's why I can find the name, but I can't tell you what it is right now. Mm-hmm. Oh, really? That's surprising because you would think the aroma would keep them away. But, well, one thing about that plant though, if you prune that off, I mean, it will keep growing. So at least it doesn't kill it, I guess. So does that, see, I understood that needed full sun to get the fruit. So I've never planted a persimmon. And you need a male and female. Mhm. Yeah. So that was a persimmon tree. Yeah. So I've not planted that because I didn't consider it really understory, or I've always heard it needed full sun. Most of the trees and shrubs, I would say fall. Now, I plant by opportunity. So if I find it in the summer, I'm planting it, but I do water it religiously until the fall. And then after, because we don't usually irrigate, we don't have irrigation and we don't water. So once the plant is established, it's kind of on its own. But yeah, so I'll plant any time of the year if I have it, because I don't like to keep plants in pots because then you really have to water, right? So I plant when I get the plant, and then if it's in the summer, I water it. If it's a fall, winter, you do, usually that's the best time. I would recommend.
You said I'm a member of something, so I got it for free. Can you talk?
Oh, the Ralston Arboretum. So if you're a member, they have their plant giveaways in first weekend in October. It's really a fun time, and you get some unusual things. I mean, they don't concentrate on native plants specifically, but it's still an interesting place to go.
I also, I'm renting but I have a lot of friends that have established gardens in the area. And you mentioned that one of the bushes, suckers, so you can dig it up. I'm imagining I can go to their yards and probably get a lot for.
Oh, yeah,
Any thoughts on which ones in particular for shady?
for shady. Well, the Elysium, you can do that. I had a friend do it. I didn't actually propagate because I'm keeping all mine because I need the border. You can do it with any of like oh my gosh.
The red twig dog.
Yeah, the red twig dogwood is a good one to do. I've done that and donated for the Plant Fest. The Saturnalia, the Virginia Sweet Spire. I don't know the calicantha. Probably if it's suckering, you could do that, but it's kind of hard to get that away from the root ball, I would think.
I'll look for lithium.
Which one?
I'll look for lithium.
Oh, Elysium. Elysium, yeah. And that's becoming more common in the trade too. Okay, and you're free to look at just browse for the books afterwards if you want to look at them. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's awesome.